PlayStation held a long-awaited state of play the other day, and considering the reveals they had in previous shows, expectations were pretty high. Many expected additional news on titles like Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok, but unfortunately neither of them appeared. A large chunk of the short event was about games we knew existed already: Returnal, Deathloop, Kena Bridge of Spirits, and others. That's not to say those games look bad or anything, some of them look fantastic. I'm really glad that Kena finally got a release date, and Sifu by Slowclap looks really cool. And as iffy as it may look, Knockout City could be really fun. It is a neat concept on paper, but they weren't the huge surprises that many were anticipating. For the most part, the state of play was shaping up to be a very middling display, until the final game appeared. After a year of total silence on the subject, Square Enix has finally given us an additional piece of Final Fantasy VII Remake post-launch content. The trailer started off with footage of the base game running on PlayStation 5, then switched over to new content featuring the one and only Yuffie Kisaragi, who looks completely amazing, especially in her cute Moogle disguise. She's everything I imagined her being in this remake saga for sure. That much is apparent immediately. In the original game, you saw nothing of Yuffie until after the group of Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, Barret, and Red 13 escape Midgar. The earliest you could run into her was right after the Mithril Mines. However, in Remake, we get to see her in Midgar during the events of the base game, specifically after Cloud goes missing after falling from Mako Reactor 5 after fighting Airbuster. She seems to have arrived in the city to team up with a sect of Avalanche for the purpose of fighting against Shinra. She teams up with a new character named Sonon Kusakabe, and the two travel around Midgar together. Then we get direct gameplay footage of Yuffie being controlled. She's running through the slums, down scaffoldings underneath a reactor, and even wall running and swinging from a cord to cross a gap. She throws her giant shuriken to break boxes from a distance and grab items inside. Her combat also looks extremely kinetic, fast, and flashy. Her aerial combo seems more significant than those of the base game cast, which is good because air combat was probably the only bad part about battles in that game. They also seem to have team attacks, specifically involving Sonon launching Yuffie with his polearm. There's also the appearance of a huge mechanical centipede boss. I can't help but wonder if Sonon's moveset is meant to give us a taste of how Cid might play in Part 2. Yuffie's footage comes to a close with the appearance of deep ground enemies originally from Dirge of Cerberus. But that's not all. After the trailer reveals the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade title, a stinger shows off one of the antagonists of Dirge, Vice the Immaculate. This is something that is met with equal parts surprise and worry, because Dirge of Cerberus is not considered a particularly great game. In fact, it's probably the weakest piece of media in the entirety of the compilation. Many people, including me, weren't expecting the remake saga to fully lean into Dirge, but here we are. However, I'm not all pessimistic about it, because this is a remake, and as the first game has already shown, some things can change. And maybe one of those things is how Dirge of Cerberus fits into the world. It would be awesome if the remake continuity can take deep ground and elevate their implementation to meet the standard of quality set by the rest of the narrative. I've seen some theorizing that the Vice in the trailer isn't real and is actually a simulated battle in VR, which could make sense, but it's a little hard to be certain with only about 2 seconds of footage on him. And finally, we see the release date of June 10th, 2021, which is fairly close. After that, we're given a showcase of the improvements that Final Fantasy VII Remake will receive on PlayStation 5, including improved textures, fog effects, and lighting. The difference in some shots aren't tremendously obvious, but they are in others, especially when it comes to lighting, which seems to boast some type of global illumination featuring real-time shading and reflections. There's also a choice between a graphics mode and performance mode, which is becoming more commonplace. The former focuses on maintaining a 4K resolution as often as possible, presumably at a locked 30 frames per second, while the latter focuses on maintaining 60 frames per second, presumably at a dynamic resolution that dips as far as it may need to go. There's a new difficulty mode in Normal Classic, which means that all team members will attack and defend automatically while you navigate menus, just like Easy Classic. But enemies have the same stats as normal difficulty. Then it showed off loading times by bringing up a new save from the main menu, and it loaded in about 2 seconds, a massive improvement over the 20 to 30 seconds or more of the original release. And finally, they showed off the photo mode, which, frankly, should be standard in any game with a strong focus on graphics. Then it all ended by proudly announcing that Intergrade would be a free update to anyone who owns the PS4 version of the game, which is fantastic. Though it seems like Episode Yuffie will be a separate purchase and exclusive to PS5, which is honestly a bit of a kick in the teeth to those who don't own the console, and especially to those who want to own the console but can't fucking find one. I consider myself extremely lucky to have acquired one within a week of launch, so I can only imagine how frustrating this is for people who have been actively trying to secure one for 3 months now. However, this is probably Square getting the inevitable ditching of last-gen consoles out of the way. They likely know this decision won't be a popular one, but their mindset here might be ripping the band-aid off so people don't expect Part 2 on last gen, which I hope it's not. I don't want the rest of this saga held back by old hardware. But regardless, it's a shame that Yuffie won't be available to PS4 owners. I guess they'll just have to cross their fingers and hope that they land one before June 10th. It's the monkey's paw in action. But the news didn't stop there. After the State of Play concluded, official Final Fantasy social media accounts announced more projects, including The First Soldier and Ever Crisis, which, if you remember, were trademarks they filed earlier this year, which led to a lot of speculation, and damn near all of it ended up being wrong. Most assumed that The First Soldier would be related to Sephiroth, but it's not. It's actually a mobile battle royale set in Midgar, 30 years before the events of Final Fantasy VII, and looks to release this year. I don't really have much to say about it, to be honest, though its events do seem to be canon now, I think. But Ever Crisis is something else entirely, and far more interesting. Most people assumed the title was a sign of impending new remake content featuring Zack. Even I did. But in reality, it's actually an episodic retelling of the entire Final Fantasy VII universe, from the original game to Advent Children to Before Crisis and Crisis Core to Dirge of Cerberus. Basically, all compilation media plus the original FF7 will be compacted and remade for Ever Crisis. Interesting. The trailer even starts with the words, "Another possibility for a remake," and shows what can only be described as the original FF7, but with more modernized visuals while still maintaining its overall 90s feel. It has the same cheapy character models walking around the world, unvoiced dialogue, fixed camera angles, same level design, etc. Basically, it looks like the remake that the most hardcore purists would have wanted. What's stranger is that the actual combat is closer to the style of Remake visually, but it seems to be turn-based with an ATB meter similar in function to Final Fantasy XIII's. I'm unsure of how else to explain it. It's weird, but it has my attention. Then it shows the logos of the compilation media it'll cover, then ends with footage of Zack about to fight Shinra soldiers at the beginning of Crisis Core, and announcing a release year of 2022. I originally assumed that each installment of the compilation represents one episode of Ever Crisis, but according to Nomura in a Famitsu interview, it'll have one episode a month after release, so I guess each story will be split into parts. I don't necessarily expect each of them to cover the full scope of the original source material though. The FF7, Crisis Core, Before Crisis, and Dirge of Cerberus episodes likely aren't going to fully cover every moment of those original games. It would be cool if they did, but I think they'll be compacted. Advent Children might be full, however, as it wasn't a game, but a movie. Experiencing Advent Children's story in game form could allow for interesting new happenings within that excerpt of the compilation. Essentially, Ever Crisis looks like it's meant to be a sort of Cliff Notes or a primer on the series, so new fans don't have to go out of their way to play old or unavailable games. which leads me to believe that the common and surprisingly well-supported theory that Remake is a plot involving time-traveling Sephiroth attempting to redo the entire compilation's events to finally succeed at his plan might be accurate. As I just mentioned, there was a coinciding Famitsu interview with Nomura, who touched on the new announcements. He clarified that only Yuffie will be playable in her episode. You can't directly control Sonon, but you can give him commands through the tactical menu. He also says Intergrade will utilize the DualSense's adaptive triggers, but other features won't be implemented until the next part of the remake. Also, another boss will be present in Yuffie's episode aside from Vice, but of course he doesn't say who. Ever Crisis will also feature a chapter centered around a young Sephiroth, written by Kazushige Nojima, and Ever Crisis will indeed have command-style combat. But probably the biggest shocker in the interview isn't something directly related to the games. Nomura said he won't be directing Remake Part 2. Instead, that will fall to his co-director, Naoki Hamaguchi. Nomura will still be involved with the saga as a general overseer and creative director of the mobile games, but Part 2 will be under Hamaguchi's exclusive direction. This is unlikely to change anything as Hamaguchi was already a co-director for Part 1, but I definitely didn't expect Nomura to bow out from Part 2 entirely. It was a big day for Final Fantasy VII. There's a lot going on here, and it makes me wonder about the future of the remake saga, especially when Part 2 will launch. Nomura said that Part 2 was already in development in November 2019, 5 months before Part 1's launch. So as of right this moment, it's about a year and 3 months into production. Is a 2022 launch a reasonable expectation? Does Intergrade represent the middle point of the waiting game for Part 2? On June 10th, it'll have been 14 months since Part 1's release, so another 14 months after that would be August 2022. And beyond that, what could the consequences of Deep Ground showing up this early in the continuity be? They seem to play a fairly big part in Yuffie's episode. There's a lot of things I'm not sure of, but I am sure that I'm really damn excited about the future of this series. Crazy things are brewing, and some aspects seem bold and iffy, but god damn if I'm not interested. This concludes my thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII Intergrade and Ever Crisis reveal. The wait for Part 2 continues to be excruciating. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.
Boss!